The night started like any other, but I should have known better. My name is Zara, and if you told me a year ago that my life would unravel like this, I would have laughed in your face. I was the steady one, the calm in the storm. At least that's what I told myself, but that night as the glow of the city lights bled through the blinds of my bedroom, I learned the hard way that even the strongest foundations can crack under enough pressure. It began with a knock, soft, hesitant, and deliberate. I was lying on my bed, legs stretched out, scrolling mindlessly through my phone. The sound startled me. "Zara?" A voice called from behind the door. It was Jace, my 22-year-old stepson. His voice was low, almost cautious, and it carried a weight that immediately put me on edge. "What's up?" I replied, sitting up and pulling the throw blanket over my legs. My tank top and pajama shorts suddenly felt like a poor choice, given the way my heart began to race. The door creaked open slightly, and Jace stepped inside, his broad shoulders filling the doorway. His dark brown eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I felt an unspoken tension that I couldn't explain. "I just wanted to check on you," he said, standing there awkwardly. His presence felt larger than the room itself, the air between us thick with something I couldn't quite name.
"Check on me?" I echoed, trying to sound casual. "That's sweet, Jace, but I'm fine, really."
He hesitated, as if searching for the right words. Then, instead of leaving, he stepped further into the room, the door clicking shut behind him. I straightened my posture, suddenly hyper-aware of how close he was. "You've just been distant lately," he said, his tone softer now, almost unsure of himself. "I wanted to make sure everything's okay." I blinked, caught off guard. Jace wasn't the kind of person to have heart-to-hearts. For the past 2 years since I married his father, Lucas, our interactions had been polite but distant. He was the quiet type, observant, withdrawn, and always keeping his thoughts to himself. "I've just been busy," I replied, forcing a smile. "You know how it is. Work, the house, life. It's nothing to worry about."
Jace nodded, but his gaze lingered, and I felt a strange heat rising in my chest. It wasn't just his words that unsettled me. It was the way he was looking at me, like he was seeing something he wasn't supposed to.
"I don't think you give yourself enough credit," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You hold this whole family together, Zahara." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. Instead, silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to say something, anything to break the tension, but my thoughts were scattered. Jace took another step closer, and I instinctively pulled the blanket tighter around me. My heart was pounding now, a mix of confusion and something else. Something I didn't want to admit, even to myself. "Jace," I began, my voice firmer now, "is there something you need?" He hesitated again, his jaw tightening as if he was fighting an internal battle. Then he said, "Do you ever feel like we understand each other more than anyone else?" The question hit me like a freight train. My throat went dry, and for a moment I didn't know how to respond. "Jace, you're my stepson," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Of course, we have a connection, but—" "It's more than that," he interrupted, his voice breaking. "You know it is." I shook my head, trying to keep my composure. "Jace, you don't know what you're saying. This is complicated." He stepped closer, his eyes searching mine. "I'm not saying this to make things weird, Zara. I'm saying it because it's the truth. You're the only person who's ever really seen me." My breath hitched, and I felt a lump form in my throat. "You're young," I said softly, choosing my words carefully, "and I'm married to your father. Whatever you think this is, it's not real." Jace's expression hardened, and he took another step closer. "It feels real to me." The room felt impossibly small, the walls closing in as his words hung in the air. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest as I searched for something, anything, to say that would diffuse the moment. Jace, I said, forcing my voice to steady. You're a good person. You've been through a lot and I get that. But this, whatever you're feeling, it's not right. It's not something we can... Don't tell me what I'm feeling isn't real, he cut in, his tone sharp but not unkind. You're the only one who's ever made me feel like I matter, like I'm more than just some afterthought. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew Jace had struggled after his mother left years ago, and I'd tried my best to fill some of the void, to make him feel seen and cared for. But this was something I hadn't anticipated, and I wasn't prepared for how it made me feel. I care about you, I said carefully, standing and taking a step back, trying to put some distance between us, but not like that. I can't. His gaze didn't waver. Why not? Because of him? Because it's wrong, I snapped, the words coming out harsher than I intended. You're my stepson, Jace. We can't just pretend that doesn't matter. He looked down, his jaw clenching. For a moment, I thought I'd gotten through to him, but when he looked back up, there was something in his eyes that made my stomach drop. A determination I hadn't seen before. What if it doesn't have to matter? He said softly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. The room fell into an unbearable silence, broken only by the faint hum of the heater kicking on in the background. My instincts screamed at me to step away, to create a physical barrier between us, but my legs felt rooted in place. Jace's words echoed in my mind, pulling at strings I didn't even know were there. You don't mean that, I finally managed to say, my voice quieter now, almost pleading. You're just confused. This family dynamic, it's not easy. But that doesn't mean... I'm not confused, he said, taking another step closer. His voice was low, steady, and unshakable. I've been thinking about this for months, about us, about what it could mean. Jace, stop. I raised a hand, palm out, as if to push the idea away. You're young. This is just emotions playing tricks on you. He scoffed, shaking his head. You keep saying I'm young, like that invalidates everything I feel. I'm not a kid, Zara. I know what I feel and I know what I want. His words were like a weight pressing down on my chest. My head spun with the implications of everything he was saying. This wasn't just an impulsive moment or a fleeting thought for him. He'd been carrying these feelings, nurturing them in silence, and now they were spilling out into the open like a dam that had finally burst. You don't understand what you're saying, I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of my emotions. If your father knew...
He cut me off with a bitter laugh. My father doesn't even know me, Zahara. He barely notices I exist unless it's to lecture me about something I've done wrong. You're the one who's been there for me. You're the one who cares.
I felt a pang of guilt at his words, the truth of them digging deep. Lucas had always been distant with Jace, more focused on his career than his role as a father. I'd tried to fill that gap, to offer Jace the support he needed, but I'd never imagined it would lead to this. I care about you, I said, my voice trembling, but not in the way you think. This can't happen, Jace. Why not? He pressed, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. Why does it have to be wrong? Because it just is, I snapped, my frustration bubbling over. It's not just about us. It's about your father, about this family. If we cross that line, there's no going back. He stared at me, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. For a moment, I thought he was going to argue, but then he turned and stormed out of the room, the door slamming shut behind him.
I sank onto the edge of the bed, my head in my hands, my heart pounding in my chest. What had just happened? How had we gotten here? And how was I supposed to fix it?
The days that followed were tense and uneasy. Jace avoided me, and I did my best to avoid him. But the tension lingered, a constant, oppressive presence in the house. Lucas was oblivious, too caught up in his work to notice the growing distance between his wife and son. One evening, Lucas announced he'd be leaving for a week-long business trip. The relief I felt was immediate, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of dread. Without Lucas there, I would be alone with Jace, and the thought made my stomach twist in knots. As the week began, I tried to keep myself busy, throwing myself into work and household chores, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the weight of Jace's words, or the memory of the way he'd looked at me. The breaking point came on the third night. I was in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner, when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Jace standing in the doorway, his hands shoved into his pockets, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady but low. I froze, my heart pounding. "Jace, I don't think—" "Please," he interrupted, his tone softer now. "Just hear me out, and if you still want me to leave after, I will." I hesitated, my mind racing. I knew I should shut this down, should tell him there was nothing to talk about, but the look in his eyes stopped me, the vulnerability, the raw emotion. I nodded, gesturing for him to sit at the kitchen table. He sat down across from me, his gaze fixed on his hands as he fidgeted with a loose thread on his sleeve. "I know I messed up," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know I put you in an impossible position, and I hate that I did that to you." I opened my mouth to respond, but he held up a hand, stopping me. "But I need you to understand where I'm coming from. You're the only person who's ever made me feel like I'm enough, like I'm worth something, and I can't just pretend that doesn't mean anything." "Jace," I said softly, my voice trembling, "I care about you, but this isn't the way." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with desperation. "Then tell me what is. Tell me how to make these feelings go away, because I've tried, and I can't. I can't." My heart ached at his words, the pain in his voice cutting deep. I wanted to comfort him, to ease his pain, but I knew that anything I said would only make things more complicated. "You need time," I said finally. "Time to figure out who you are, what you want. And I need time too, to figure out how to handle this." He nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping. I don't want to lose you, Zara. You're the only good thing in my life." Tears filled my eyes, and I reached out, placing a hand over his. "You're not going to lose me," I promised, "but we have to figure out how to move forward, together." The days following that conversation felt like walking on thin ice. Jace kept his distance, but I could feel his presence everywhere, his gaze lingering too long, his movements too deliberate. I busied myself with household chores, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but the tension between us was palpable. One evening, the house was eerily quiet. Lucas was still away on his business trip, and I had retreated to my bedroom with a book, hoping to lose myself in its pages. But the knock on my door shattered the fragile peace. "Come in," I called, my voice steady despite the apprehension curling in my stomach. The door opened, and there he was, Jace, standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He hesitated, his hand gripping the doorframe as if it were the only thing holding him upright. "Can I sit?" he asked quietly. I nodded, setting the book aside. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, his shoulders hunched as if carrying the weight of the world. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice soft but firm, "about what you said, about needing time." I held my breath, waiting for him to continue. "You're right," he admitted, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I need to figure myself out, and I can't do that here, not like this."
His words took me by surprise. What are you saying? He looked up, his eyes meeting mine with a mixture of sadness and determination. "I'm saying I need to leave. I've been holding on to something that's not fair to either of us. It's not fair to my dad, and it's not fair to you." Emotions swelled in my chest, a strange combination of relief and heartbreak. "Jace, you don't have to—" "I do," he interrupted gently. "This is the only way I can move forward. I need to start fresh, somewhere new, and Maybe then I can figure out who I am without all this. Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them away, nodding. If that's what you think is best, then I'll support you. I just want you to be happy. He gave a small, sad smile. You've already done more for me than anyone ever has. I hope someday you'll forgive me for making things so hard. There's nothing to forgive, I said, my voice thick with emotion. You're doing the right thing, Jace, and I'm proud of you for it. The next morning, Jace packed his things. He didn't say much, and neither did I. There were no words that could adequately capture the complexity of what we were feeling. As he loaded his bags into the car, I stood on the porch, watching him with a heavy heart. Before he got in, he turned to me one last time. Thank you, Zara, for everything. I nodded, a tear slipping down my cheek. Take care of yourself, Jace. You're going to be okay. He smiled, a real genuine smile, and then he was gone. Lucas returned a few days later, oblivious to the storm that had passed in his absence. I told him Jace had decided to move out and start fresh, framing it as a young man's quest for independence. He accepted the explanation without question, and life slowly began to return to normal. But I was changed. The experience had left a mark on me, a reminder of the fragility of relationships and the importance of boundaries. I threw myself into my marriage, determined to rebuild the foundation that had been shaken. And though I missed Jace, I knew his decision to leave was the best one for both of us. Months passed, and I received a letter from him, a simple note saying he was doing well, that he'd found a job and was making new friends. He thanked me again for being there for him, for helping him see what he needed to do. I folded the letter and tucked it away, my heart heavy but hopeful. Life had a way of surprising you, of throwing challenges your way that you never saw coming. But it also had a way of healing, of offering second chances. And as I stood in the kitchen that evening, the soft hum of the heater filling the silence, I allowed myself a small smile. We had weathered the storm, and though the scars would remain, we had come out stronger on the other side.